gentlemen. When Manasseh first showed up at my office, probably only about a month and a half ago, I could not match the speed of his productivity. The timeline that he had for publication and for launch was such that I just could not match it. So we agreed instead that I would do a review of the book once it got published. This is still not the official review that I promised them. I just decided that I would give you some sense of what I have gathered so far reading the manuscript. So one cannot begin to appreciate the enormous significance and the exceptional courage that the publication of this book represents until one steps back to catalog the costs, the constraints, and the risks the author will have had to navigate and overcome in order to write and then proceed to publish this book, and at this time. We can reckon the costs, the risks, and constraints from multiple dimensions: professional, cultural, political, even legal. Within Manasseh's professional culture, that of contemporary Ghanaian journalism, this book is quite exceptional. It is not the kind of work journalists of a generation do or even understand their job to entail. We are not used to seeing our journalists get into this kind of contemporaneous political biography and commentary. There are far easier, low-risk, high-return ways to organize and live one's life as a journalist in today's Ghana. In putting out this book then, Manasseh has not only tried to be different professionally, to set himself apart from the pack, he has also shown us what journalism at its essence does and must mean and entail, which is to use one's craft, the power of the word, written or spoken, to improve society by shining the light of critical scrutiny on the affairs of state, including on the public lives of those we entrust the power to govern us. Journalistically, that is, of course, the road less traveled by the members of the fraternity and sorority of which the author is a part. And it takes quite some courage to take the unbeaten path. There are also cultural risks as involved in the making of this book. The subject matter of this book, both in terms of the persons whose acts of omission and commission are surveyed in the book and the issues that are covered, are not ones that are readily broached in our hierarchical, often gerontocratic culture, where men and women of Manasseh's age and social position are expected to show deference or respect or else. If you are a regular visitor to Manasseh's wall on Facebook, and you've taken the trouble to read through some of the comments his posts or commentaries invite, you can appreciate what it is I'm talking about. Then there is the obvious political dimension to this book, the asymmetry of power between author and subject, the highly divisive binary political context, and the lenses through which this publication is bound to be read. Indeed, the politics that is sure to surround the timing of the publication and its release. The fact that the protagonist whose political career lies at the heart of this book is not only very much alive, but remains a formidable political force, indeed a leading presidential candidate in our contemporary politics. In many respects then, this book, though historical in the sense of pertaining to events in our recent past, is every bit about the present. Indeed, I do not recall another book in Ghana's bibliography of this kind, a book about a political career, about a political figure, about a president no less, about a political era written and published when that career and that era is still unfolding in our very eyes. So this is essentially a very unique book, quite unprecedented in the history of political writing and journalism in Ghana, as I can recall. And last but not least are the legal risks and constraints that this book and its writing and publication also entail. In our legal culture, where long-standing judicial doctrine has constrained the ability and freedom of journalists and other writers to write and publish freely and biasing facts, and sometimes even opinion, about the holders of power, an environment where unflattering stories about the powerful are said and heard on and kept restricted to the grapevine, but rarely in public, where journalists have learned to survive by self-censorship for fear of retribution, Manasseh's work, which, when you read it, it really does name names. I mean, he doesn't shy away from naming names, and when you look at it from that angle, it is both daring and path-breaking. It takes a Manasseh indeed. Manasseh's life and experience as a journalist of our times has obviously prepared him uniquely for this role. In a way, this book is not just a work of political biography, it is also indeed autobiographical. As you turn the pages of this book, it becomes clear that this is also every bit about Manasseh, about his worldview, about his values and principles, the values and principles that have defined his moral compass, about what he understands to be the nature and the demands of his calling and of his role as a journalist, as a citizen, indeed even as a voter. As he himself shared with us, in this book we learn, among other things, why Manasseh switched from voting for President John Dramani Mahama in 2012 to casting a vote against the man he calls his political idol 4 years later. All of that, what the man Manasseh is about, comes through very vividly in this fascinating record and recollection of the Mahama years. I have just said about this book, The Fourth John, Reign, Rejection, and Rebound, that it is a political biography. But it would be misleading to see it as simply a biography of the president whose photograph adorns the cover of the book. Yes, the book is centered on the political career of John Dramani Mahama, and specifically of his tenure as President of the Republic of Ghana, and before that, as Vice President. But that is only one of the senses in which it is a political biography. Manasseh's latest work is also a political biography, more importantly, of the times in which we live, of how the game of power is played in our contemporary politics, of the interests and influences that shape and dominate our politics, sometimes distorting and perverting our democracy. This book is a biography of why and how our politics, conceived and justified in the name of the people, all too often fails to put the people first. The First John, then, is a book about many things Ghanaian. It is about our contemporary history, about our politics and political culture, about the business of government and governance, about leadership, its opportunities, its challenges. And from Manasseh's own unique vantage point, it is also above all about how not to govern. In that regard, it holds important lessons for all of us but especially for those who seek and are entrusted with the power to govern this land of our birth. If we know nothing about Manasseh at all, one thing we do know from his journalistic career so far is his abhorrence of corruption. The righteous indignation he has brought to his journalistic crusade against corruption is very much at the center of this book. In the pages of this book, we learn more about some of his defining exposés that happened on the watch of President John Mahama, notably the Jida scandal, the Ford scandal, to which he has referred. You are also going to understand why mention of Zoom Lion often gets Manasseh's heartbeat racing. This book gives an interesting treatment of the ways in which the public and private dimensions of corruption conspire to hold back our development and exacerbate inequality in this land. Manasseh is extraordinarily effective, in my view, in getting the reader to appreciate how corruption in Ghana operates as a kind of reverse Robin Hood, a case of the rich taking from the poor, and why we must all be mobilized and resolved to fight corruption in whatever form we encounter it. It also gets you to understand then the motivation, the source, what drives Mahama's moral and righteous indignation against that disease and why he fights it with every breath in his life. I have a great deal more to say about this fascinating book, but I will reserve a full review of this book for another time. For now, I must congratulate Manasseh Azure Awuni for this very rich addition to our contemporary political history and journalism. Well done, Manasseh. Thank you.